I found, wow, programming is really cool. It has a lot of freedom in it, right? I think that's one of the things that draws us to it. But the problem is that's something that, your employer controls. On the surface, programming seems like just any other career. But in one of the darkest periods of my life, it became a destructive addiction. At work, people would praise me and talk about what amazing code I wrote, how good I was at explaining things, how great of a consultant I was at that point, or an architect. But at home, my family hardly had a relationship with me. Sure, I took them on trips occasionally. We ate together pretty often. I was in the house a lot. I still was here for my wife and my kids, but we had no connection. There was no closeness. So today I want to help you out a little bit by sharing some things that are a bit of a warning. And depending on where you're at in your career, you may not be ready to hear this yet. You may not agree with me, and that's okay too. I make these videos not to get agreement, but to actually impact your life and help you. But I want to share some signs that programming may be taking over your life in an unhealthy way. And then in the second half of the video, I want to give you some just really practical things you can do that I've done as well to get your life back from programming so that it's not more than a job and becomes everything to you and you just can't live your life and enjoy it and do anything else, really. So first, let's talk about some signs that programming is taking over your life. Years are going by and you keep focusing so much on programming and so much on technology in your job that the years are drifting away and everything else that's of importance to you in your life seems to just be, drifting through your fingers. Well, one of the first things that I think is a big sign is if your entire life outside of work is mostly digital. And what I mean by that is if the time you have off of work, you're sitting on social media, occupying your brain with things other people are doing, or just kind of brainless entertainment, or you get stuck into doom scrolling. You're looking at, sensational, negative news just to kind of occupy your brain with things. I also, I've shared in many of my videos, I was a marijuana addict for a very long time and I would smoke weed. But I would also play video games a lot in my spare time. And so if you're programming all the time, and then when you're done programming, you've been spending all this time on the computer for hours for your employer or your clients, you suddenly have free time. And the first thing that you go to is other digital experiences, and I'm not trying to knock all of these, by the way. I think, I go on social media to a point. I still play video games occasionally, but if this is something that takes up the majority or a lot of your time outside of doing, code and programming and you're doing side projects and things like that, that's one of the biggest signs I think you can look for that it may be time to really make a change if you want to get your life back. And I'm going to, talk about that more as the video goes on. The second sign that programming is taking over your life, you're losing hold of the things that matter besides it, is getting into this kind of vicious cycle between stimulating and chilling out. And what I mean by this, and this is so common, and let me tell you, I'm a career coach. So remember, I'm meeting people all the time online about their career, and they're sharing their struggles with me. And I struggled with this too. If you get up in the morning and just to get going, you got to, cram a ton of coffee, like 2-3 cups of coffee just to get going so that you're available for your job and you're alert enough. And then throughout the day, let's say you get tired around 1 p.m., you drink another coffee. I've known people who've drank 7 to 9 cups of coffee a day. I never got that high. I think I got up to 4 was the most I would drink, and that was a real problem. But the bigger problem is then you get off work and you need something to, bring your nerves down, chill you out. And so you smoke a joint, or you drink a beer, or quite a few beers, or, whatever you do to wind down. And if you get into that vicious cycle where you're using basically substances to build yourself up and give you energy just to get through the day, and then you need to take something else just to tear you back down, that's an addiction basically that you're starting to develop. And programming itself, just the job that you're working, and then this doesn't have to be specific to coding per se, but, doing tech work, technology related work, technical work where you're using your brain a lot, you're having to focus a lot creatively. If that becomes so gripping in your life that the only way you can get through it is to use substances basically on a, daily basis. I'll tell you, as someone who, I'm going to be 48 this year. I've been doing this for 26 years now. You may be fine right now if you've been doing this for 5, 10, 15, maybe even 20 years. But if you keep up that routine of stimulating yourself, chilling yourself out with substances, stimulating yourself, chilling yourself out with substances, there will become a point where you just can't maintain it anymore and you have to get off of them. And I can tell you from experience, trying to program when you don't have the stimulants to assist you, when you're used to it for 20 years, is very, very difficult. It's doable. I'm off caffeine. I can do it, but it's not an easy transition. The third sign programming is taking over your life, it's just slipping away, is you have no quality time with your friends or family. There's a big difference, like I said earlier in the video, between being available to your friends. Let's say you're going out to a movie with some friends that or you're going to see a band, or you're married, you have children, and you're trying to spend some time with your kids. There's a big difference between putting the time in and having it be quality time. I have tried to be as honest with you in these videos as I can be, that I made a lot of mistakes as a father when my children were growing up. I didn't spend nearly enough time with them where I was actually available to them and really encouraging them and being a dad and leading them. And it's one of the biggest regrets of my life. Now, they've since forgiven me. I've apologized for that. When I went through recovery from my addiction, I had to ask amends of people. That was a very humbling experience. But, if you don't want to have to ask forgiveness of your kids for, kind of messing up their life or just not being there the way that you could be, that's one of the biggest signs that you probably are letting programming take over your life is, at night or on the weekend, you could be doing something with family or friends, but instead you find yourself escaping again through other digital activities, or, you're abusing substances or really just doing anything to distract you from having any kind of meaningful relationships in your life anymore. The fourth sign that programming is completely taking over your life is you have no non-technical hobbies. This is something I share with a lot of my career coaching clients when they come to me, and one of the things they're struggling with is finding a sense of purpose in their work after programming for a long time. And when I first got into programming, I was a musician at that time. Now, I wasn't a big musician or anything like that, but I played guitar, I sang, I wrote a lot of songs. My band was one of the most important things to me in my life. And once I got into writing code, that was an avenue for creativity for me. I found, wow, programming is really cool. It has a lot of freedom in it, right? I think that's one of the things that draws us to it. But the problem is that's something that, your employer controls, right? How creative you can be. And versus like music or art or, anything you might do, sports, where you get to be the one that sort of creates or facilitates how you want to, accomplish the thing that you're going for, the goal that you're pursuing. If you give up all those things in the name of programming, and this is what I found myself, you don't basically have anything for you that you can do that really gives meaning to your life, where you don't have the shackles of your employer saying, well, I'm sorry, I know, Jamie, let's say, for example, you're excited about this new framework or this new programming language, but we don't need it. Or you haven't convinced us enough that it's the right thing. And they could totally be right? I see a lot of programmers, and I used to do this earlier in my career, who kind of try to shove a technology into a solution at a company they're working at just because they want to use it, or they want to, build up their resume, when that could be the totally wrong thing. So, If programming is the only avenue that you really use for creativity and growth in your life, and you have no hobbies outside of that you do anymore that let you be creative, you can start to feel really empty inside. You can start to feel like the purpose of your entire life has just become programming and work. And so if that's something that you're experiencing, when we get to the second half of the video, I'm almost there. Maybe take a step back and think about how important is programming really versus other things that meant more to me in my life at one point, and they probably still mean something to you. You've just convinced yourself, as I have, well, that was when I was a kid, I don't need to play music anymore. That was just something I did when I was younger. No, I've found, even here approaching 50, creating music for me is something that it fills me up inside. I love to do it. If I don't do it, my life starts to feel empty and meaningless. And the fifth sign that programming's taken over your life is you're living paycheck to paycheck. Now, this isn't, let me make sure I'm clear here. This isn't the situation where you have high expenses, you live in an area of the world where, you're working a programming job, let's say, and you're hardly spending money on anything. You're just basically able to cover, your mortgage, your rent. You have no, Netflix subscriptions. You're not eating out and, you're not buying unnecessary purchases or anything. Just making the bare minimum, you're living paycheck to paycheck. Well, hey, that's how we all start out, right? Sometimes you need to move to a city that's cheaper to live in or move into the country, or sometimes you need to change, your expenses. But one of the things I used to do, I don't know if you relate to this or not, is my job programming became so hard the longer I did it that I made a lot more money. But because I was so miserable subconsciously, and I just felt, kind of trapped in corporate America and just trapped, in that my work had become very difficult and frustrating, is I would justify spending spending way more of that extra money that I'd worked so hard to earn on frivolous, stupid things. I would eat out way more than I needed to. I buy, guitars and things when I already have a couple guitars, they're fine. And I had too many. I've gotten rid of some, but right. Whatever it is for you, it could be collecting, I know people that collect bourbons and things like that. But, if you're spending your hard earned money, and justifying spending it because your job's so difficult, but then it's keeping you in this situation where you're not able to really save anything and you're financially just kind of barely afloat. That's a pretty serious problem. And it's also a big sign that programming may have taken over your life. So what are some changes that you could make now to start to get your life back from programming? Well, one of the first things, and this is difficult, but if you can do this, and I've done this at least to the best of my ability, it will completely change your life, is you need to divorce yourself completely from the values of the software industry. Now, let me unpack what that means a little bit. When you work a job or you go on LinkedIn or you talk to a lot of your coworkers or even friends who might work in tech, there's a lot of subtle cues that we're getting about what matters in life and how we should be going about our career. Things like, well, if other people leave work at 6 and you want to leave at 5, you're not really a committed person in your job. So make sure you stay later. Again, it can be one of those things. Now, there's actually managers that will say that to people, but sometimes it's more of like a thing we put on ourselves because we just look around at everyone else and we kind of think we have to do that. Also, I talked in some prior episodes about hustle culture and what a huge problem that is. If you buy into this idea that if you just work your ass off, you'll be able to accomplish some big dream. If you don't accomplish it, you're just going to burn yourself out. It's a really unsustainable, kind of tempting lie to sell to people. It really bothers me, and I'm guessing if you're watching this, it bothers you too, that there are so many people online today that are really just preying on your desire to have some more control over your life. And so they're selling you, these false promises of ways to get rich quick with Bitcoin or starting your own company. And again, there's ways you can do that, but false promises that make it sound much more certain than it is, much easier than it is. But also you'll see on LinkedIn, I call it accomplishment signaling. It's basically people publicly putting out, look at this big accomplishment I had, and look at this big raise I got. And I was featured in this, and I had a press release in this. And that's all cool. I don't want to diminish people's accomplishments, but if you're having a hard time feeling like you have a life, and working in tech is beginning to, exhibit some of the signs that I talked about earlier in the video, then the last thing you need to be doing is getting wrapped up in the industry and their obsession with accomplishments. You need to focus on your own accomplishments and really completely remove yourself from as many of the things that other people are telling you about what you have to do. Learning addiction as well. I talked about this in the video on AI, the episode a couple episodes ago. We often are constantly learning over and over and over again, not because we really need to, but because we've somewhat been programmed, no pun intended, to keep learning. The second thing you can do to start to get your life back if you're losing it to programming, and this is, I think, really valuable and easy to do, but you got to enforce it, is to schedule a social activity right after work. Now, what do I mean, and why the hell would you do this? Well, often when you're on the job, there are all kinds of things that can happen where your boss or even your colleagues, other people you work with that are the same level as you, will pressure you into staying late, or they'll pressure you into doing work at home that night for, just an hour or two. Or they'll pressure you for helping with deployments on the weekend and things like that. When, if you took the job, you took it under the condition, the expectation typically that it's about 40 hours a week. And, we've got this huge problem in our industry where there's sort of this unspoken expectation that, like, if you get a job in tech, the hours can be kind of whatever the hell it takes to get the job done. And if you want to get your life back, you can't buy into that. You have to be able to stop work at a reasonable time, the same time every day. So, if you have a hard time leaving at the same time every work, or there's a lot of peer pressure or corporate pressure to overextend yourself, coming up with, a bike ride that you go on after work with other people, where it's not just I'm going for a bike ride, like I'm part of this bike riding team, or you got to practice with your band, or you need to pick up your kids from school, or anything where it's something social. It can be small. It doesn't have to be a long, big thing. But if you can make sure that you have that part of your schedule and you can communicate that to your employer, hey, I have to leave. This is great too if you say this in the interview. Set those expectations at the very beginning. You can still do it in the middle of employment, but it's harder, right? If you let your boss know, hey, I got to be, at my son's school at 6 p.m. every day to pick him up, so I'm going to have to be out of here at 5. That really helps you when you get into those situations where people are kind of looking around the office, or they're looking around who's available in Slack and in the channel. Who can I grab real quick to stay a little longer to help? You do not want to be that person. Trust me. If you want to get ahead in your career, you want to get ahead by accomplishing more valuable things, not by working more hours. That's the way, line workers in manufacturing would sometimes get, raises, as productivity. Remember, we're knowledge workers. So that's not what you should be looking to actually get recognition. The third thing you can do to get your life back from programming, if it's taken it over and it's slipping away from you, is start getting control over your finances. I'm going to be honest with you. This is something I only started doing really earnestly in the last few years. I've been fighting to do it for about 6 or 7 years. But, if you've gotten used to a somewhat comfortable income or dual income in America, or in a country where programming still pays pretty well, you can get yourself into a situation where you don't even know what you're spending every month. You have no idea. So if you can sign up, mint.com used to be a great site that you could do this. They now got bought out by Credit Karma, which is a decent tool, but it doesn't offer the same features. But, I don't want to endorse any specific tools here. I'm not sponsored or anything like that. But, if you just do some simple Google searches, there's some really great tools out there that you can hook up to your bank account. If you're concerned about privacy, read the disclaimers. I'm not concerned about it. I've been using these kinds of tools for like 15 years. But but they can show you trends. Here's how much you spend every month. Here's how much you save. Here's how much you spend and save in each category. But if you don't have any kind of insight into your personal finances, if you kind of just have an idea of what you're spending, at least what I've found is you're going to always have these unexpected, expenses, things like, you pop one of your car tires and suddenly you got to blow a couple $100 on that, or somebody gets sick and has to go to the doctor. And if you're not actually looking at not just, what are my predictable monthly expenses, but, let's say you have a website like I do and you have to get an SSL certificate once a year. I have a spreadsheet actually where I keep track of all my monthly expenses, and I put all my yearly expenses in there. And then I just kind of divide it by 12 to give me an average monthly expense. I do a few other things. I don't want to get all detailed about it. And I'm going to be talking more about business finance and personal finance to help you if you do want to become a freelancer or a solo consultant or start a company this year. But this isn't the video for that. But anything you can do to get control of your finances, if you got to cut eating out, if you got to stop having DoorDash deliver stuff to you, that's a huge money waster. I think you know that. If you're subscribed to like a ton of different subscription services, Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, HBO Max, like Disney Plus, pick one. Or like for us, Prime, for example, includes videos. We just use that. And if it's not in Prime, we occasionally pay for it. But like, anything you can do to get control over your finances and anything you can do to stop spending money on unnecessary, frivolous expenses, that's going to give you the money that you can start to save. That'll give you the cushion so that if you get into a situation where your job becomes unhealthy, and your manager's pushing you in ways that are unrealistic, you can say no and not worry that you're going to lose your job or get fired over it. Or if you do, you've got some money to sit back upon so that you can make sure that you keep your career moving forward and you're not trapped. The fourth thing you can do to get some time back into your life away from programming is you can make sure that your role in tech is really the right role. One of the things that I experienced, I don't know if you're at this point of your career yet or not, is that if you're a software developer or a software architect, not so much an architect, actually lead developer, QA analyst, tester, a lot of these positions, we spend so much time on the computer, focused, writing code. And then the only time that we really get for a break is like the daily Scrum meeting or, a quick call to troubleshoot something. That's not really any variety, so to speak, in the level of work that you're doing where it's kind of mental work versus social type of work. I don't mean a social worker, but, work where you're interacting with people, you're discussing things. Now, I'll tell you too, the longer I wrote code, I became more antisocial. I think this is a big problem. People have talked about this, but it's not as well documented. The longer you spend on the computer, the more you get used to just interacting with, somewhat of the binary aspect of a computer. You put information into it, you either get it out or you don't. And, people aren't like that, right? We're a lot more unpredictable. And I think the longer I would spend just writing code, and that was the main thing I would do in my life, day after day after day, with very little other variety, the worse I got, to be honest, at interacting with people, even in my personal life. So, you may have seen, I've got this freebie on my website called Tech Rolepedia. It's a collection of the top 25 job roles in the software industry. I got a lot of data. I built this little data hub basically that you can look at it and it'll help you figure out, is just being a straight programmer the best job for you? Or are there some other job roles in tech, that might still involve programming, but maybe it's a smaller portion? Or maybe there's some things about your personality that you really, haven't considered how they stack up against programming, because honestly, you got, sold getting into coding by a career coach or, a boot camp or somebody. And maybe there's something else that's better for you out there. So if you're thinking about that, check out the link in the description. Feel free to check it out. I've had several thousand people get access to it. They really have found a lot of value in it. But if you're starting to wonder if, programming's taken over your life, one of the things you can do is you don't have to stay stuck. you can look at a lot of other jobs that are available out there that still involve technology, that still let you let you work with code on some level, but it doesn't take up your entire life and every, bit of creative energy during your day. And the fifth thing you can do to get your life back from programming is have a career exit strategy. What I mean by this is know where you're going. Know what the end looks like. This was a huge problem for me. Nobody helped me with this in my career. Basically, when you get into the software industry, your first job, right, you're just trying to kind of get your foot in the door and get the job. And then you work maybe a couple different jobs and you're improving your skills. But there becomes a time where if you keep doing that, just getting a new programming job, younger people than you all of a sudden start to look a lot more attractive to employers because it becomes much more difficult to sell your value proposition. Now, there are people who have been able to remain pure software developers 30 years into their career. But I'm telling you, remember, I meet a lot of people online. This is the exception. This is the gross exception. Most people have to do something a little bit different if they want to continue to grow and they want to continue to make money. So one thing I can tell you about is last week, around Christmas time, a little bit before Christmas, I released the new version of my career guide. It's a freebie. There's a link in the description to that too. But I got a really great response from that. A lot of people downloaded it. I've put a little framework together with some kind of diagrams, and I explain, what they mean to try to help you figure out, what stage in your career are you at? Are you growing at the right pace? Or are you trying to grow too fast? I mean, there's people too who are like, I want to be a senior developer and I'm 2 years in. And it's like, sure, we all do. But is that a realistic expectation to place on yourself? Now, there's people that do it successfully in that they get the title, but I'm here to help you have a sustainable, healthy career. So if you haven't checked out that career guide yet, check it out. But, one of the biggest things that you can do to help you make sure that you're going to have a sustainable career and you're going to have a life while you're writing code is to basically know where you're headed so you know when you're stuck and you need to get out of it. Because at the end of the day, at some point, you're going to need to retire. And that can come earlier or that can come later, depending on the decisions you make and what you allow yourself to get stuck in and how you push yourself to grow. And the other thing is, if you push yourself too hard and retire, what kind of retirement is it if you're burned out? I think a lot of people think, well, if I push myself as hard as possible and I retire at, 42, I'll take a couple years to just chill out and recover, all the stress I put myself through. And then I'll have my whole life and all these millions of dollars. Yeah, dream on. I'm sorry. I'm sitting here again, approaching 50. I know I'm just one person, but I've been in this industry a long time. I know a lot of people in the industry. That's probably very unlikely, not only that you will make that kind of money and retire early, but that you're going to get there. And if you are burned out, you're going to just bounce back in a couple years. It's going to be seriously challenging. So I don't mean this video to be like, doom and gloom. I'm really just trying to inspire you. Programming isn't a horrible thing. We all love to do it. But I think there's some intrinsic aspects of tech culture, programming itself, and sort of our human behavior that if we don't make some changes, it really can take over your life. And so I hope these tips really helped you today. What are you doing personally to try to make sure programming doesn't take over your life? Leave me some comments. I love the comments. I appreciate everybody sharing things they're doing with each other because, I know a lot of people don't just watch the video, but they also read the comments and really get a lot of value out of that. So let's talk about it. Let's discuss, have you found some things in your life that maybe have become unsustainable or a little bit more difficult to find meaning in or just really enjoy because of programming? And are some of these things I'm sharing with you things maybe you're already doing, or do you have some new things you can share with the rest of the community that will help us all out? Until next time, thanks.